Thank you all for being here and or listening, if you're listening to this after the fact. Today is our introductory sort of kickoff session in regards to an ARPA grant, and we'll be talking more in depth about that. But the overall focus of this ARPA grant is, as far as we're doing with it, is this idea of redesigning behavioral health and crisis response. And really through kind of this lens of holistic health and neurodiversity, which I'll get into and talk about it more today, and specifically in this context of the overlap of disability in the long-term care system. So all of those things kind of together and the impact that that has on people's lives. So starting off, I just wanted to do some introductions here. I am Dr. Angela Marks. I am a licensed psychologist in Wisconsin and the founder of Place of Mind. And we are a statewide organization that right now there are 4 of us, clinicians who support the work at Place of Mind. And our work is really focused on the unfortunate gap that's there. We say we exist in that gap of mental health and disability health. All the work that we do at Place of Mind is community-based. So we literally go to people and meet people in their preferred places. We don't have offices. We're not in a medical setting or anything like that, that people come to us. We go to people. And like I said, statewide, and really our focus is on, in our work, as well as with this, the grant as well, is to really demedicalize and decentralize health, specifically mental health, because that's our jam, that's our focus. You'll hear me talking about a lot about brain and brain health today, but just health and wellness overall, and recognizing this as an individualized process, that each person defines what health and wellness looks like for them. So we exist, like I said, in the adult and children long-term care system. So some of those, people may be more familiar with what they are. So the Children's Long-Term Services, CLTS, IRIS, Family Care, as well as the kind of mental health side of things with the CCS program, Comprehensive Community Services. And like I said, we are statewide. So our whole goal is to make this as accessible to anybody, regardless of where you're located in the state. And we do that in all sorts of different ways. Really focus on this idea, like I said, of meeting people where they're at. So I'm going to let each of the other clinicians, just so you can kind of see their faces on here too, and let them introduce themselves. So why don't we start with, I'll just go in order here on our pictures here. So Kristen, would you like to start?
Hi, my name is Kristen Grumban. I have been with Place of Mind for nearly 3 years now, I think is where we're at. So by background, I am a mental health counselor. And so I joke around that it's a lot of learning and unlearning what we have cultivated in kind of that clinical setting. And so also just a wide variety of different backgrounds, working in managed care as well, and a lot of focus in behavioral health. So just excited to be part of Place of Mind and continue to move the pendulum towards this neurodiversity affirmative health and wellness.
All right, thank you, Kristen. Katie, would you like to go next?
Hello, everyone. My name is Katie Getchow, and I am a registered nurse. Prior to joining the team at Place of Mind, which I joined with Kristen around 3 years ago as well, my background is primarily in hospital settings, and then that sort of transitioned into more community-based settings, which felt like a really good fit for the work that we're doing at Place of Mind. So also happy to be here.
All right, thank you, Katie. And then Hannah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hannah. I am the the newest clinician with Place of Mind here. I've been on the team for, I guess, coming on a year almost-ish. My background is as a licensed social worker here in Wisconsin, working towards becoming a clinical social worker right now, and have worked in a variety of different settings, from like autism behavioral treatment settings to educational settings, and more recently outpatient clinical settings, doing trauma-informed care and trauma work. Really excited to be a part of our interdisciplinary team and continuing on with this meaningful work.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Hannah. So that's us. We like to say we are small in numbers, maybe seemingly, but really value a lot of the partnerships and connections we have throughout the state, which we will touch on some of those today as well. So we, like I said, exist in kind of the disability health, mental health. Our specialty is in that overlap, which we'll talk about today as well. So I want to put this, like I said, the grant, the specific grant process is this ARPA grant, which is meant for in this context of the long-term care system. So we exist very much in that system as clinicians and providers. We do consultation work with individuals and teams, like I said, throughout the state. So I want to put this in context because it also, I think, for me, shed some light on kind of the why behind this grant and this particular focus of the grant that we have chosen to focus on. So when we think about the long-term care system, it impacts people, right? So kind of like once you're in the system, there is a high impact there. So the systems impact, which we'll talk about more too, is pretty, it's just different, right? It's different than people who maybe don't find themselves in the long-term care system for various reasons, right? So the system impact and a large part of the kind of dependence, right, on the system. And also recognizing, I think we hear this all the time, like just how much there's no resources, there's no funding, there's not enough money. So this system that's supposed to kind of provide, often becomes people's kind of whole life, but also not really seeing the whole person, right? Or able to maybe even support the whole person. So it becomes a lot of fragmented, kind of siloed approaches or kind of just ways to go about supporting a whole person. And once you're kind of in that context of the system, it does become really influential on a person's life, right? So current kind of approaches, which I've been doing this work in various different ways, even before I became a psychologist, for about 20 years, started off in direct care and just have ebbed and flowed into different professional roles throughout, and actually was the reason why I went to get my PhD, because I saw the needs that were not being met in many ways. So, having said that, just recognizing the importance of thinking about just how much of an impact, and that how our current approaches are really impacting people, specifically as it relates to the focus of our grant, which we'll talk about. So our current approaches, right, when people typically think about behavioral health, is typically folks who maybe have high behavioral support needs, or maybe they're experiencing some concerning behaviors, or people are just confused and concerned about what's coming out outwardly, right? That's the majority of the referrals that we get in our clinical work at Place of Mind. So typically when that comes up, people really focus on the behavior. Right. So it's really focused on that surface level. What are other people seeing and noticing, and how other people might be interpreting that, really focused on compliance based in the way of normalization. So this is the way to look, this is how health looks, this is how a human looks, this is just what's appropriate, right, in society as determined by others, or this idea of it's just what's normal. So it's really focused on that compliance-based piece of things, as well as this idea of physical protection, right? So really the heavy focus on physical protection, especially when people find themselves in just times in their life where maybe stuff is coming up that might be concerning, people tend to focus on that physical piece of protection. So that can look like limitations, restrictions, isolation, seclusion, restraint, all of those things in the name of physical protection. So that is kind of the current state. That's what I have known for many years being in this. The current state of things are really reactive and treatment focused, right? Like there's something that happens. So that means like there's something, you know, that you have to focus on and get treatment for, that's really focused on the behavior instead of the whole person, which becomes really dehumanizing, right? We don't always see the person when this stuff starts to come up. The things that surface become the focus. So these current approaches, again, this is more context as to the why, I think, behind into what's different about the grant project that we're engaging on. So these current approaches really come with high costs. So I talk about them as high financial costs as well as high human costs. So this graphic here is kind of this idea of what we like to refer to at Place of Mind as this prison of protection, right? Coming from maybe a well-meaning place, but it's all about protection. It's all about physical protection. We need to protect, but because of that, right, it actually enhances vulnerability for folks. So financially also, it results a lot of hospitalizations and readmissions for, you know, crisis purposes, emergency purposes, those types of things, institutionalizations, high medication use, and typically many services and supports, right? So high costs financially, as well as the bigger piece for me that I worry about as a psychologist who thinks about human health and mental health specifically, is the high human cost that this comes at. So it really limits people's life. It limits people's experiences, which from a brain health perspective, that doesn't help with creating healthy brains and facilitating healthy brains. It really increases people's vulnerability. People are left with unmet human needs. So we'll talk about kind of these psychosocial, these basic human needs that are just left unmet and even, you know, discounted or forgotten about. And it also results in a lot of stress and trauma. So the current approaches, like I said, really have this focus, right, of protect and, you know, kind of react and protect, okay? So what is kind of this redesign? So the redesign is kind of, for us, we talk about it as reframing from that prison of protection to this ring of safety, which actually is what keeps people safer and less vulnerable. So the redesign is focused on health and diversity. So we call this and like to refer to this as this idea of humanizing. So just kind of pieces involved in this idea of humanizing in this redesign is focusing on neurodiversity. So this idea where differences, brain differences are differences, not deficits that need to be pathologized or treated or fixed, really focuses on true inclusion and accessibility and supports and accommodations, recognizing that we are all interdependent and all of us have supports and accommodations, just some of them are more normalized than others. And this idea about health and wellness, right? So we're not just responding when stuff comes up or when sickness or difficulties come up, but really trying to facilitate health and wellness and prevent those things as much as we can. So brain and body science, we talk a lot about like what does keep us healthy as humans, but recognizing it's also dependent on each person's lived experience and the individualized approach to what healthy and well and successful and all of that looks like to each person. And then with folks, we really focus on this idea of self-advocacy in everyday life. Unfortunately, when people, become part of a system, the long-term care system, and also have stuff coming up that might lead people to respond within a protective way, a lot of their everyday life decisions become really limited sometimes, right? So it's not self-advocacy in these like bigger ways, although it could include that as well, but just kind of self-advocacy in everyday life that really starts with understanding ourselves and facilitating identity development so that it really is an informed decision and choice is actually a choice, right? And then this idea of focusing on psychosocial and those human needs. So focusing on support networks, on citizenship, on these things that we call basic human needs that are just like things that every human being needs in their life, although how it may present and look is going to be dependent on each person and their unique sense of self and their unique brain, body, and experience. So what we know is, right, there's lots. So typically when we have conversations with folks about like, okay, how should we do this, right? It's like, we just need more resources. We just need more training. But what we have come to discover in trying to provide some of those things with teams is that those alone are not sufficient. There's lots of that stuff out there. There's lots of trainings. There's lots of opportunities to learn, to get information. But we have learned, and we've tried to do that in various ways ourselves, that those things alone are not sufficient. So what we are seeking to do with this grant is to think about how we can actually create capacity and community to enhance quality of life, promote wellness, and address inclusion and citizenship. So those seem like maybe pretty abstract, like lots to them, or maybe abstract concepts. So I'm going to try to now talk about how concretely we are going to attempt to do this with the grant process. So I think one of the main things is that this process is not something that we are doing alone as clinicians. That really we are engaging with folks who are going to be most influenced by this to co-create it with us. So that's why I'm sharing today. It's like, I'm going to share some concrete information, but exactly how this is all going to evolve and emerge is yet to be determined, because it is really this co-creation process. We don't want to just create something, right? And then, have it be something that actually isn't going to be helpful for the folks who it's for. So we are engaging in co-creating it. So our specific focus of this grant, which I'll talk about the why behind this too, is focusing on these three groups. So the first one being neurodivergent emerging adults. It's a mouthful, but I'll talk about what that is in a second here. And then kind of the folks who maybe influence their experience or engage around them. So carers of neurodivergent emerging adults. So being, I've kind of started referring to it as anybody who cares, anybody who's engaged and cares about maybe this topic or this work, but could be, parents, guardians, relatives, anybody, who's kind of, who cares, as well as kind of professionals. So folks who are more in those professional roles of overlapping or supporting neurodivergent emerging adults. So I'm using these words, so I want to clarify what I mean by neurodivergent and emerging adults, and kind of why that's our focus, at least putting it into context of the grant specific work. So when we think about neurodiversity, it is a biological fact. So just like biodiversity, right, which means there are all sorts of creatures and beings that are needed in this world to make ecosystems and to make the world go round, neurodiversity is saying that same thing, but recognizing it with brains. So what neurodiversity says is that no two brains can be the same. And that's absolutely true. There's no two human brains that are exactly the same because our brains are, built from not only genetics, but experiences, the things that happen to us as well. So no two brains are going to be exactly alike. We talk about this kind of neurodiversity affirmative approach, which is the approach that we take at Place of Mind, and is the context of the grant too, is that the differences, brain differences, are not necessarily something to be pathologized, but that those differences, just like biodiversity, are important and actually necessary. And I'll clarify the terms here because I think people use the terms interchangeably. So no single person can be neurodiverse. So neurodiverse or neurodiversity is meant to describe a group of people with different kind of brains. And then within that, there's these clarifiers between neurotypical and neurodivergent. So neurotypical is going to be the neuromajority. So that essentially means there's more people of that specific trait or combination of traits. So that's a person whose brain works in ways that society views as normal, right? This has huge societal implications here. And then neurodivergent is going to be in the neurominority, which essentially just means there are less people with that trait or that combination of traits. So that's a person whose brain works in ways that differ from what society might view as normal or typical or appropriate or socially acceptable, all of those things. Okay, so for the grant, we are focusing on the neurodivergent, so people who don't fall in the majority. And then the emerging adulthood period from a brain development perspective is an absolutely critical time. So the early years in our life are a critical time, and then this is the next critical time in regards to brain development and just human development. So we've identified kind of this age group a little bit differently than maybe some of the, transition language that's out there. It's, from about age 15 to 25, give or take some years there. But 15 to 25 is what we're considering this emerging adulthood kind of age group. Because what we know is that from a brain perspective, although people like to think, adulthood starts at age 18, but our brain is still developing and doing really important things in very powerful ways until around age 25. So because of that, this is a period that is full of, it's supposed to be, right? So it's expected that stuff is going to come up. If anything's going to come up, it's going to typically come up during this developmental age period if it hasn't already. So it's a time full of psychological and environmental instability just because of what's going on in the brain and the person. It can be a time full of stress and also equally a time full of a lot of growth. During this time period, the brain is way more sensitive and vulnerable. I won't get too much into all the stuff that happens in the brain during this time period, but it makes it more sensitive and vulnerable. And why we focus specifically on it is not only because this age group makes up a large majority of our referrals in a clinical setting, but that it has a potential to shape the trajectory of, adulthood. So people gain specific reputations during this time that unfortunately we find carries on through people throughout their whole life for folks who are in the system, right? Typically that doesn't happen to folks who aren't in the system, but that it does. That's the potential to really shape kind of a person's future. And then also during this group, a big focus of the grant is creating community and peers. And specifically for this group, the brain is also gravitating towards peers. So peers, social is everything for the emerging adult brain. So that is the focus, like I said, of this grant, although the work itself could be translatable to all ages, right? The real focus is on this very critical time. So really our focus is thinking about those emerging adults who are most at risk of social isolation and exclusion. So similar things here, you've already seen this slide. So because of the long-term care system, and when folks find themselves in the long-term care system, this is why. The same things are here. This is why we see social isolation and exclusion here. Specifically as it relates to these things here that I've already talked about in this idea of more about the prison of protection versus, reframing safety. So how are we going to kind of join and kind of start to kind of do this work? So we are joining with those 3 groups that I talked about. So neurodivergent emerging adults, carers, anyone who cares about that age group or that subset, and then professionals too, who might be overlapping with that neurodivergent emerging adults. So we're joining directly with folks to do this process of what we talk about as doing differently. Not always meaning an action, but how might we think about things differently? So it's that perspective piece of it. And then what might we do to actually act and support people differently? And then how might we actually join with and further support ourselves, our support teams, and the neurodivergent emerging adult differently? So like I said, we talk about this as humanizing. Humanizing health, humanizing, we add healing into here because what I say when I talk about working with neurodivergent folks is you can't do health without healing, because neurodivergent individuals are also an oppressed and in the minority population. So unfortunately, because of that, a lot of stress and trauma. So I say you got to do both, even if there's not a specific acknowledgement or diagnosis or whatever it might mean. Both are really necessary. So these are just different ways. When I talk about kind of these social determinants of health or citizenship or wellness, I think people have all these different ideas of what could go into there because yes, there's a lot of stuff that makes up. So this is our focus, right? You're not going to see here anything about behaviors, about compliance, about rewards, about, all of those external things in that way. There's nothing about that here. So we talk about it as kind of the focusing on what's underneath behaviors, because when we think about, this is a quote that we have on our website and we use a lot at Place of Mind, is when a flower doesn't bloom, you change the environment in which it grows, not the flower. So typically the individual is the focus, the blame, the, hey, we got to fix this. It's their fault. They're doing this. They need treatment. They, lots of othering happens here, versus how can we, do differently? How can we actually support so that the person can grow and bloom? So that's the shift here. That's the shifting, again, it's maybe a big shift, but shifting not only the practices, but the focus, the underlying why behind the practices. So in a more concrete way, the 2 main goals of the grant and possibly other things may emerge from this co-learning process as well, is to make there be an accessible curriculum and community around this that not only affirms neurodiversity and reclaims and redefines and seeks wellness for all, as well as kind of interrogating those systems, right? So there's just a lot of systems pressure and impact and that I think people also forget about when, you're kind of just focusing on the person, but on the context too, to really create a different approach, a different common sense approach or sense of what is possible than what is currently present or available to people. So when we think about that, one way that we are joining with these different groups is through experiential learning groups. So it's not just a info download type of training process, but coming together for 24 weeks as a core group to engage in some of this deeper experiential training, learning, reflecting, all of those things. It's an engaging process, not just a coming and listening sort of process. And with that, co-creating a curriculum with these kind of 3 groups that we're doing prototypes with that could be used and utilized beyond those 3 groups with other groups as well. So doing these again. And really within those groups to create ongoing relationships and communities of care and support. Thinking about the creation of, kind of communities around this too. So I'm going to, the first group we've already started with is kind of the first prototype group, I guess that we should say, is the professionals group that we have partnered with ARPA in doing a humanizing health and healing fellowship with a group of professionals at ARPA, as well as defining, hiring, and recruiting a neurodiversity navigator within the organization as well. So Jenny is on, so I will let Jenny, just feel free to share whatever you would like about ARPA or the process so far.
Thank you, Dr. Marks. So I'm Jenny Felty, CEO for ARPA. We are a service provider organization that provides various services for youth and adults with disabilities throughout Western and Southern Wisconsin. And so services include things like various skills training services related to how people live day to day, also skills training related to employment and actual employment support, and also various supported living services, including community-based supported living for people who live in their own places. And then we also have a couple of adult family homes in La Crosse. So we currently have 11 office locations, 3 more sizable office locations in Black River Falls, Janesville, and La Crosse, where we provide a bigger variety of services. And we're in about 13 counties within those areas. So that's a little bit about ARPA. We were very excited to be a part of this collaboration with Place of Mind. We realized as an organization that there were certainly gaps in how neurodivergent emerging adults are supported, especially those young folks who have more complex support needs. And we certainly weren't sure how to address those gaps. And so we were really excited to partner with Place of Mind as the kind of provider partner of this project to, learn from them and learn with them about how better to address those gaps and how we could be a part of that. So Dr. Marks talked a little bit about the fellowship. So we've completed our first 6 weeks part of it, or 6-week kind of part of it. And now we've moved on to another 12-week, 24, 12, kind of deeper learning part of the fellowship. And we have individuals from all different departments participating, all different locations. So it's a pretty diverse group of staff that we have involved. And we're very excited. Morgan Fleming was recently hired as our neurodiversity navigator for the La Crosse area. And we're working on finding another neurodiversity navigator for the Janesville area. But Morgan is somebody who has been providing some direct service for Aptive and will continue to do so in some capacity as we figure out how what we're learning impacts how we're supporting people and what that looks like going forward.
Great. Thank you so much, Jenny. So more to come with all of this. Like I said, this is just our introductory. We are going to have more of these types of sessions to share more of the experience and learning as well. So another piece of thinking about, how content experts are usually defined. Our content experts for this project are people in these groups with lived experience. So these lived experience interviews that we've started, and some of you have, I recognize some names, even though I know I haven't been part of all of them, but some of you have been engaged with us around some of those, is again, just learning from folks, what's coming up around this, this age group and these topics, and through those types of interviews, and then individualized kind of co-learning opportunities. So being able to, the group process is a process that, we've already started with the, just one prototype of that group process with a group of professionals at Aptive. We are also going to have carers and a neurodivergent emerging adult group that will be starting as well as a prototype. More to come on that. But joining with people in all sorts of different ways, not just part of those group prototypes, but also just really engaging with folks and kind of individualized ways to learn with them, whether you fall in any of these groups, to engage in more of that co-learning process. So other pieces of our just partners and processes so far is, again, really this process of co-creating is really different maybe than what some people are used to, but it's really seeing what emerges. And we've already learned a lot just in starting to do this work in the past 5 months or so. Lots has emerged already that we couldn't have planned for at the beginning, right? So it's really allowing for things to emerge and be co-created from this process. We have a guide, we have a general, kind of way of, encouraging thinking and practices around this idea of doing differently. But really it's a process we do with people. So we also have some collaborators in the project who are folks who just bring a whole, again, wealth of knowledge and experience in all sorts of different ways. So some of the names, you may have heard of before. So Marcy Brost is an individual who has been a partner of Place of Mind since the origination, quite frankly. Is the DD network as well. Maybe some people, have the DD network has been around for a long time as well. And John O'Brien, who is an international, kind of capacity builder around things related to disability. And then Aaron Smith also, who has a lot of experience in kind of the long-term care world. And so these are our collaborators who are joining with us in all sorts of different ways to think about co-learning and sustainability, and the hope and the intention, I shouldn't even say hope, this will expand beyond the grant period. So this is the work that we do every day as clinicians. So it will expand in some way or another, even after the grant process. So thinking about how that might look and just the different ways of continuing on this work, because we have 22 months is what our grant period is. And to even pretend like we're gonna do all the things associated with this in 22 months is not possible. So, I mean, people have been working on this for, 50 plus years. So it will be sustained. But for this grant process, it is 22 months. So it's over a period of time. We're just about, like I said, almost 6 months into it. So it's going to be a process. And like I said, statewide. So our focus is on, it doesn't matter, where you live in the state, but that really making it accessible and available to folks statewide, even though our prototypes may be in specific areas. The goal, right, is that it is statewide, and we work statewide too. And really, the context of this is long-term care, right? Like that is where the grant is housed. And a lot of the work that we do is to in that system of long-term care. So the hope with this too is that we will inform, some of the system stuff. And also, this is a big piece of what's exciting to me about the grant opportunity is to also expand beyond long-term care, because like I said, oftentimes long-term care becomes a person's whole life, but it's not, right? So it's maybe a piece of supports, but if we rely on long-term care to be a whole person's life and supports, it really is going to limit, right? Because there are just, some of the ways, even if we, do some systems change stuff, it is a piece of a person's life and support, although it often becomes a whole person. So how might we expand beyond those confines of long-term care and create bigger communities of care and support around this too? So just more about kind of the goals and the intentions of it. So like I said, I wanted to share both the intentions. Like I said, these are what our intentions are, but also what we've learned already is stuff has emerged that we weren't even intending. That's really helpful and important as well. But these are kind of the guides, I guess, that we're trying to work towards, is this idea about advocacy or self-advocacy being kind of these everyday life things that come up, right? So a better understanding of oneself and one's psychosocial and support needs, as well as practical strategies for folks to prevent crisis and or to feel better prepared to respond to concerns when they are experienced and when they do come up. To inform crisis prevention and response models, to inform the children and adult home and community-based waivers support systems, and to reduce admissions, to reduce admissions and readmissions of crisis hospitalizations, to create community, right? So communities of care and support, opportunities for members of those communities to be moderators, facilitators, peer support, and then the potential for these specialized certifications and career development opportunities for individuals and professionals as well. And then really to build on capacity, right? So which places priority on those psychosocial needs, those human needs, those everyday life needs, and to recognize that there is diversity in the support. We have to have diverse supports in order to counter the isolation that often happens with this kind of one-size-fits-all approach. And then to provide alternatives to restrictions, right limitations, alternatives to that prison of protection that often happens. So if any or all or some, or you're just like interested in this, or overlapping in whatever way, or just interested in staying connected, like I said, be lots of different opportunities and ways to do so. I've mentioned those experiential learning groups already, or the individualized interviews and opportunities to co-learn with individuals, being part of this bigger sort of partnership community, and or the communities of care and support. And then, like I said, this is only the first of many to come. listening sessions. So we want to hear from folks, as well as just overall bigger learning events around the goals of the grant, which is neurodiversity, affirmative, and health and wellness, and how do we do differently. And so those will be opportunities to come throughout the next month's, I guess, year and a half of the grant as well. So if any of those sound interesting, you may have already, just because of the invite, had the information on it. So this will take you to our website as well. So we have a grant specific tab on our website if you want to be part of it, even if you're not sure exactly what or how or what it's going to look like. Please subscribe. That will be the way that we are starting to collect just anybody who is interested in joining with us in different ways. And so please subscribe to that. That's where we will be sending out different opportunities, announcements, learning events, listening sessions, all of that. And or you can also connect with me directly. So my email is here as well. So if you just want to shoot an email, have a brief conversation, whatever you want to do, chat more about it, feel free to reach out to me directly as well.